The main culprit are not the dumb old boys in white sheets. It is the smart guys in keffiyeh crowd, the openly pro-Hamas agitators, and their youthful idiots, including some of our own youth, who walk around Manhattan shouting that the final solution is coming again.
And now, the Edwin Black Show. Sponsored by the Books of Edwin Black, available on Amazon and at booksellers worldwide. And now, here's Edwin.
Hello, I'm Edwin Black, investigative journalist, historian, and author of 225 editions in 40 languages in 190 countries worldwide, including IBM and the Holocaust, War Against the Weak, and the Farhud, as well as many other books. This show is for opinion makers and decision makers, not mass clicks. So if you think our show's content is meaningful, spread the word throughout your most informed networks. Subscribe for free alerts at theedwinblackshow.com. And if you want to support our work, we need your assistance. Please visit theedwinblackshow.com/support. Your help, big or small, assures our complete and utter intellectual and uncensored journalistic independence. Go to theedwinblackshow.com/support and keep us independent. Today's episode is made possible and sponsored without any preconditions, requests, or stipulations by members of the Jewish community of Mexico City and co-sponsored by USF Hillel in Tampa and also Save the West in Palm Beach. If you would like to honor someone with a sponsorship, contact us. That said, remember, I only speak for myself and for history. The same goes for my guests. Today, we welcome viewers from across America, including our 4 watch parties in the villages, Newton, Mass., Chicago, and once again, Tampa Bay. Hi, Harvey. Overseas, I see viewers logged on for most of our usuals: Australia, New Zealand. I see Germany, Holland, Sweden, France, Italy, Spain, Poland, Great Britain, Canada, Mexico, I'll be there in a few days, and Israel, plus other countries. If you have a question, place one short sentence in Zoom's QA feature. The Edwin Black Show, along with our YouTube site, is global and fast growing, enjoying many scores of thousands of views. We speak frankly and without tremor to a fragmented world seeking better understanding of our tormented past, our present very, very tense, and a turbulent future still uncertain. By the way, stay tuned for my special word of wisdom at the very end of the show, just before I sign off. We have a lot to cover, so let's start. So much is happening on so many fronts with Trump's daily earthquakes, sometimes hourly. It is hard to plan a show. So our special report on America's corrupt and criminal banks will be rescheduled. I'll just say that America is facing a banking crisis due to the massive criminality and incompetence among our best banks. For example, the most criminal bank in the United States is a Canadian bank, TD, known for its brilliant green painted branches. TD has been money laundering millions of dollars for Colombian drug cartels. TD is not alone. Other criminal banks include Bank of America and Wells Fargo, but I'll save this topic for another day. Let's go to Trump 2.0. I would need to broadcast 24/7 to keep up with the earth-shattering promises made and promises kept, so I'll just offer 2 teaspoons, or actually just a few. First, was the FAA really infested with discriminatory DEI ideology that impacted staff? The answer is yes, as was most agencies in the United States government until Trump came. I've acquired a copy of just one of the FAA's bizarre DEI training manuals. On page 10, it gives staffers a crazy self-excoriation for mental and emotional micro inequities to be avoided, including forced smiles, and also inappropriate body posture. On the subsequent page, staffers are told to get in touch with their reptilian brain to figure out how they could avoid micro inequities. That's their reptilian brain. A lawsuit was filed against the FAA, credibly complaining that 1,000 qualified applicants were rejected because they were white, and with some scoring 100% on their training scores. In the meantime, we learned that 90% of the air traffic control towers are critically understaffed. More about this massive story on another day. Number 2, we now see that the padlock on the basement has been broken, and the gigantic dirty money kickback and political agitation slush fund known as USAID is now forcibly exposed. Every hour we have been astonished by details of the misspent billions. You've all heard of these. $1.5 million to advance diversity, equity, and inclusion in Serbia's workplace. $47,000 for a transgender opera in Colombia. $32,000 for a transgender comic book in Peru. $2 million for sex changes and LGBT activism in Guatemala. $6 million to fund tourism in Egypt. I thought Egypt had the pyramids. Then there were hundreds of thousands of dollars for a nonprofit linked to a designated terrorist organization, even after an inspector general launched an investigation. Millions went to EcoHealth Alliance, remember them, funding gain of function at the Wuhan lab, and hundreds of thousands of meals went to an Al-Qaeda affiliated fighting group in Syria. Funding to print personalized contraceptive birth control devices in developing countries. That was a lot of money. And hundreds of millions of dollars to produce heroin in Afghanistan. Let me say that again. Hundreds of millions of dollars to farmers to assist them in producing heroin in Afghanistan. $2 million for pottery classes in Morocco. Since the 9th century, when 6,000 Spanish artisans were imported into Fez, Morocco has had a global reputation for exquisite pottery. I don't think they needed our help. Anyone can now find out about these billions of dollars by going to Google, type this website into your search bar, usapayments.com, and then in that same search bar, you could put your search term. That's the fastest way. By the way, it is true that the Biden government administration has been funding political coverage. For example, the influential news organization Politico, which has received some $8.2 million via a massive influx of government subscriptions to a political climate newsletter called E&E at about $10,000 to $24,000 a pop, with some departments such as the FDA ordering 37 subscriptions. This newsletter mainly told the government about the government. By the way, the White House has just canceled those subscriptions. Number 3, zeroing in during the last election, we were barked at, faked out at, and gaslit at continually by Democrats and their allies in the media, charging that Trump was an anti-Semite and a new Hitler. So let's go over what Trump has done in his first hours and days. First, he appointed the most astonishingly pro-Israel diplomatic and security team in history. This includes Mike Huckabee as ambassador, who vowed to stop using the fake geographic designation West Bank for what has been known for centuries as Judea and Samaria. Remember Judea? That's how the Jews got their name. The fake term West Bank only arose after Jordan's illegal 1948 invasion of Israel, in which Jordan seized and annexed the land on the West Bank of the Jordan River. Jordan, you will remember, was a completely fabricated and invented country created by a mere Winston Churchill memo in September 1922. It was carved out of 77% of the internationally approved Jewish mandate. It was granted independence only 2 years before Israel's own independence. Plus, Trump appointed Stefanik as U.S. ambassador, who will challenge every misdeed at the UN. Trump is also withdrawn from the scandalous UN Human Rights Commission, which is led by such human rights giants as Afghanistan and Eritrea. He canceled all funding to the Hamas Front organization, known as UNRWA, which played so pivotal a role in October 7 and has worked so hard to develop a cradle-to-grave culture of Jew hatred in Gaza and a society literally devoted to terrorism from the earliest school age. Trump has also issued an EO sanctioning the kangaroo tribunal known as the International Criminal Court, with financial impediments so severe they can't even buy a ham sandwich on a credit card anymore. And that's why the ICC prepaid staff salaries for 3 months just before Trump came to power. The important sanctions regime would have become a congressionally approved law if it were not blocked by the Democrats, led by Chuck Schumer. Remember, almost the entire Democratic Party is under the control of its Jew-hating and Israel-hating majority bloc. Now, Trump is deporting the foreign students who have embedded at our university to foment Jew hatred, support for Hamas, and the agitation for Israel's destruction. The first to go was a Chinese plant at UCLA named Lu Lijun, who organized many of the most threatening pro-Hamas rallies at that campus. Hundreds more at Columbia University and elsewhere are on the list. What's more, Trump has created an anti-Semitism task force to identify and take decisive, concrete, in-your-face action against anti-Jewish actors across the country. If Trump is Hitler, he's doing a lousy job. Actually, Trump is not Hitler, but the Democrats and the anti-Trump media are Goebbels, who boasted that a lie told often enough becomes the truth. Now to Gaza, very, very briefly. Trump knows that after 80 years of trying, no amount of new language, new ideas, or new cash payoffs, even those that came in suitcases month after month, will convince the Gazan people to live in peace or use water pipes for water instead of missile tubes. Here is a historical molecule on Gaza. Gaza is today not a sovereign land. It is a non-sovereign territory illegally occupied by Hamas. For almost 500 years, Gaza was an Ottoman Bedouin backwater. It transferred thousands of Albanian and Balkan workers there to cultivate for the Sultan. And of course, many Egyptians crossed over, which is why there is such a popularity of the name Masri. Turkey lost its colonies after World War I when its empire was dismantled. Gaza then became a British mandate and was expected to become part of the Jewish homeland alongside numerous other states which were devoted to Arab capitals. In 1948, Egypt illegally invaded and annexed the Gaza Strip as part of its war against Israel. And remember, Gaza is still not sovereign. Israel reclaimed Gaza in the 1967 Six-Day War, massively building up the Gaza economy. After the ill-fated Oslo Accords, Gaza was placed under the non-sovereign administrative authority of the Palestinian Authority in Ramallah. Israel withdrew completely in September 2005, but then the terrorist group Hamas arose, murdered the Palestinian Authority representatives, and seized control. Under international law, that's an illegal military occupation. They have illegally occupied since then and created a murderous society of terror financed by Iran, Qatar, and the UN itself, plus many of its members. The Gaza population went from a mere 250,000 in 1950 to 2 million today. It's a place where children learn to kill Israelis before they even learn their alphabet. Before anyone starts screaming displacement and ethnic cleansing, remember that every hour of every day, Hamas proposes that millions of Jews be transferred out of Israel. the State Department Arabists and others in the Democratic Party's anti-Israel movement continually propose that hundreds of thousands of Jews should be moved out of their towns in Judea and Samaria. 9,000 Israeli citizens living in 25 settlements in Gaza were evicted as part of the Egyptian peace plan. Turkey expelled some 15,000 Jews from Tel Aviv and Jaffa during World War I. And most of all, I seem to remember that 850,000 Jews from more than a dozen Arab and Islamic countries were all summarily pauperized and expelled out of those countries. And of course, they were rescued by an airlift to Israel. After every major war, the map is realigned and redrawn to address past and future hostilities. Trump is thinking bold like global leaders before him have. And now to the main topic, a second Holocaust. I am devoting my 2025 to preventing a second Holocaust. Time to be honest and look at ourselves in the endless mirror of history. The world mourns a Jew who has been murdered, but scorns a Jew that fights back. We need to scrutinize the big picture. No one cares if Jews die. I'm having a hard time making sure more Jews even care about this. The Jews have been expelled, their women raped, their people murdered, and their property confiscated for centuries, in some form or another, from Israel itself by the Romans, but then a long list of regions. From Alexandria in 415, from Medina in 627, from the Goth region in 612, Mainz in 1012. The Crusaders massacred and burned Jewish communities across Europe en route to the Holy Land just for practice. From Paris and other French cities, one after another expelled in the 12th century. From Leicester in 1231, from Vienna in 1253, from Cambridge in 1275, 1276 from Bavaria, 1288 from Italy, 1290 from England, stem to stern, 1492 the Spanish Inquisition, 1496 the Portuguese Inquisition, 1499 from Nuremberg, 1510 from Naples, 1551 from Bavaria, 1593 expelled from the Papal States, 1597 from Milan, 1679 from Yemen, 1791 to the Russian Pale of Settlement, and Tennessee and Mississippi and Kentucky, also expulsion orders via General Order Number 11, Ulysses S. Grant, and yes, Jews were rounded up on the spot and forced to flee on foot, although within weeks, President Lincoln quickly reversed it under a great deal of pressure. Tsarist pogroms massacred village after village in the late 19th and 20th century. About 200 separate pogroms. This includes the bloody massacre at Kishinev, which was reported by newspapers worldwide thanks to the just invented news service known as Reuters. From generation to generation, all we know is that no one cared and that death and destruction lived on with our community as a birthright. Remember, Fiddler on the Roof is a song, not a destiny. Immediately after World War I, during a 2-year period, Ukrainian General Katluria's forces killed perhaps 80,000 Jews in a massive town-by-town sweep of bloodlust. Almost no one listening to my voice even knows who Petluria was. 80,000 in 2 years. 13 years later, Hitler came to power with his campaign to exterminate Jews in Europe and then worldwide. Everything he planned was announced via an international advertising program overseen by the Goebbels propaganda ministry. Almost every atrocity was reported in the news. The camps were well known. Hitler's allies were in countries across Europe, North Africa, the Middle East, Latin America, and indeed in North America, from Wall Street to IBM headquarters to the Detroit masters at General Motors and Ford. Canada, remember Canada? When Canada was asked how many refugees it would take in, Canada declared that, quote, none was too many, close quote. No railroad tracks were bombed by the Allies. No camps were liberated, just accidentally freed by gasping soldiers marching somewhere else, and that includes Auschwitz. The millions of leaflets printed up warning the Germans to stop harming the Jews were never dropped. Our refugee ship St. Louis was turned back at every port and returned to the Third Reich, where most of its passengers were murdered. The U.S. would not have even intervened in World War II in Europe had the Japanese not bombed Pearl Harbor, which meant that after we declared war on Japan, Hitler declared war on the United States one day later. Even with troops on the ground, ships at seas, and bombers in the air, no Nazi killing machines or infrastructures were interfered with. Our friend Roosevelt, the closest Roosevelt came to concentration camps, was putting innocent Japanese Americans in them. In 1945, the World War II ended, and the truth about 6 million Jews arose. But only 3 years later, the Arabs, infused with 2,000 prominent Nazi monsters, promised to finish the extermination once and for all as Israel came into existence. And they said so publicly on the front page of the New York Times. And then when 850,000 were publicly rounded up in numerous Arab and Islamic nations for denaturalization, pauperization, and then mass expulsion, saved from death only by an emergency airlift to Israel, and all of it covered live in the newspapers and radio stations of the day. Since then, the Mideast Arabs and their Islamist partners have created giant institutions and even national structures to killing the Jews, half of which now live in Israel. Be careful here not to include the Muslims as a group, since many Muslims from India to Azerbaijan are wonderfully friendly to Israel, and a number of modern Arab nations have reconciled to coexistence, from Morocco to the UAE, and soon we think Saudi Arabia. That hasn't stopped October 7th from happening, and the incessant promises daily to repeat the operation annually with knives if possible, and with nuclear bombs if available. So here's the memo to my producers and programmers. We are done with such shows as Kristallnacht 2.0. No more frightening warnings. Sure, I could shock you with the latest outrages of violence and threats du jour. I could tell you that a few hours ago, we learned that a major Jewish talent agent in Hollywood had his house smeared with red handprints and warned of death. I could tell you that in 2 days, Columbia University Apartheid Divest will be holding a teach-in on the first Intifada violent murder spree, originally scheduled for St. Mary's Episcopal Church. And I have it here. You will notice that there is a knife stabbing at the bottom of the artwork. That stabbing motif is advertised with the Arabic words, "The sound of Intifada is the loudest sound." I could tell you about violent anti-Jewish organizations with slogans, "By any means necessary," and "Within our lifetime." That means within our lifetime, destroying the Jews in Israel. Just to be clear, the main culprit are not the dumb old boys in white sheets. It is the smart guys in Kafia crowd, the openly pro-Hamas agitators, and their youthful idiots, including some of our own youth, who walk around Manhattan shouting that the final solution is coming again, who beat up Jewish children in Queens and Brooklyn. They bomb our synagogues in Canada. They map our homes and businesses in Massachusetts with computer programs the way IBM used to do with punch cards, and they openly chant, as they have in Australia, "Gas the Jews, gas the Jews." In Sydney, they did this in full sight of the Opera House. So first we need to reach back and feel the harpoon of history firmly lodged between our shoulder blades. We are way beyond cries of anti-Semitism. We are way beyond fears of Jew hatred. We are now in survival mode. If you can't figure this out for your sleepy self, at least do it for your children and grandchildren. Now, what are we going to do about it? You can forget about your outreach campaigns and your educational campaigns. It's too late. Now we want what ADL Director Jonathan Greenblatt called for. And I'm quoting here, something at the level of a Mossad pager. What are we going to do? Number one, we need people like Trump to champion our cause. Seek them out, Trump and others, in the US and now in Holland, Argentina, and Belgium. We need concerted action, not only here at home as we see it, Baruch Hashem, so we're saved for a few months, but also against other countries failing to protect their Jewish citizens. And I mean Australia, Canada, and England. Tariff them. We already see that President Trump has taken steps against South Africa for its campaign of confiscation against white South Africans. And indeed, Secretary of State Marco Rubio is boycotting right now the G20 in South Africa to protest South African discrimination. And remember, South Africa is at the forefront of Jew hatred and anti-Israel conduct. Number two, we need to add to the words litigate, 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 which I and others made famous. We need to add the words legislate, legislate, legislate. We need civil protections into law here and elsewhere, as Germany has done. Three, we need to expel, incarcerate the ringleaders, as we did when we broke the Klan and other racist gangs. So we need enforcement, enforcement, enforcement. This includes going against the sources of finance and organization. And who am I talking about? I'm talking about Qatar. I'm talking about George Soros. I'm talking about the UN. I'm talking about the anti-Israel media and others which have been infested with this anti-Semitic personnel. I have much more to say, but for now, I must yield. We start with one of the world's most important thinkers on all matters Holocaust, who's going to help us explore this issue. We start with Yossi Hollander in Tel Aviv. Take it, Yossi.
Thank you very much, Edwin. I mean, I always learn something from you. Never fails. I'm going to speak about Europe because the US is very different. And the topic there is, I think, a little bit different than the US. I'm sure other people will speak about the US as well. I think Europe is lost to the Western civilization in general. I think they decided 60 years ago not to have kids and commit suicide, basically. And as a result, I think they've, on the other hand, imported a lot of Muslims and let them take over their societies. They are the dynamic force in society. So I think Jews will leave. And they are leaving, and I think they will leave. I don't think there'll be many more Jews in Europe in about 10 years, 15 years. What I do think is happening in Europe is actually a counter-history to the Jewish history. If you ask me if there'll be concentration camps in Europe in 10 years, my answer will be yes, is yes. But it will be for Muslims. In the end, the European nation will wake up, and we have seen what they're capable of, and I think this will be across the board. The interesting thing is that currently most of the friends of Jews in Europe are actually right-wing parties. We just had, I think yesterday it was a new right-wing government in Belgium that reversed all anti-Jewish and anti-Israeli policies of the previous government. The greatest friend right now that Israel has in Europe is Viktor Orban in Hungary. So this is like a very interesting irony that is happening in Europe. And I think it has to do with what I call the joint enemy. And the joint enemy is not Islam, it's Islamism, funded by Qatar, not anymore by Saudi Arabia, with the clear purpose of making conquering Popeland, as they call it. Okay, conquering Europe. And unfortunately, a lot of European societies have collapsed. Some of them will never be able to recover. I don't think Holland will be. But I think maybe France and Germany for sure is already recovering. Just to understand how deep it is. So even on the worldwide statistics, Sweden is now considered the rape capital of the world. But they're hiding their statistics. The real statistics are much, much higher. The most popular app in Sweden is an app that shows women where they can walk safely at night, okay, where there are no groups, etc. This is the reality of life today in Sweden. So I think Europe has lost its ability to fight in many places. In many places, it's bought already. Look at Macron. And therefore, I think Jews will leave, but we will see massacres and concentration camps in Europe, but they'll be for Muslims.
Well, that is an extraordinary and insightful comment, because you're a man who not only sees the crisis now, you're thinking ahead 2 and 3 iterations. How is it possible that Hungary, which cleansed its Jews in complete cooperation with Eichmann on all those trains and had these anti-Semitic political parties, how is it possible that Hungary can now brag to be the safest place in Europe for a Jewish walking on a street? How is that possible?
First of all, if you notice, there are 2 countries in the EU that completely refuse to accept any refugees. Okay, Muslim refugees from Syria, Afghanistan, etc. That's Poland and Hungary. And for that, and by the way, the person fighting the Hungarian government right now is, of course, George Soros. So just by the fact that he's fighting them, we know that they are our friends. Okay, I think this is like by default, right? But in reality, they have a very simple interest. They want to maintain, they want to develop. Right now, because during the war in Gaza, all the Israeli sports team are playing their home games in Hungary because they cannot play it in Israel, so they're now playing it in Hungary. Hungary become actually now the sports capital of Israel. Interestingly enough, Hungary is running against Qatar for the 2036 Olympics. That's another interesting kind of fact that we should all remember who is our friend and who is our enemy. But I think the reality is that it's a very simple calculation, okay, right now on their behalf. Also, Hungary and Poland have been the protectors of anti-Israel resolution in the EU, because the EU, all resolutions have to be accepted by all states. And these 2 states have blocked all those anti-Israel resolutions of the so-called Western world, developed righteous world, which is England and, for example, and France and Spain. So I think Europe is changing, but it's changing not because of the Jews, it's changing because of the attack on its basic institutional culture by an invading culture.
And so you think that Europe is going to snap back before it snaps at us? It's going to snap back and turn against the threat. Is that correct?
I think certain countries, it's too late for them. They're just too rot, and etc. and too loud. But certain, like Belgium, I don't know if they can do it. Okay, they have too many Muslims. Okay, I don't know if they have the will, etc. France, I expect a right-wing government to take over within the next decade.
Well, I don't know if we have a decade, but I hope I'm around to test your theory. Thank you, Yossi. And now I want to go to America's #1 Jewish defense attorney, a man who's been up to the Supremes 28 times. I want to give you Nathan Lewin in Washington. Join us, Nat.
Well, I have to say that until the results of the 2024 election, I was extraordinarily pessimistic about any American government's ability to defend the United States. What we saw under the Biden and Harris administration was going to lead to a Holocaust in the United States and to destruction of any support by the United States for Israel. The good sense of the American electorate to elect Donald Trump, I think, has reversed that in terms of official government action, and not particularly after the extraordinary joint news conference between President Trump and Prime Minister Netanyahu. I am now optimistic about American government support for Jews and Trump's promise and efforts to combat anti-Semitism. On the other hand, the very bad indications in the United States come from, when I was young, would be very surprising sources, which are the liberals and the universities. Now, America's great liberties, the liberty of speech, of expression, are being invoked in terms of efforts to destroy and harm Jews in the United States. And my fear is that the application of these great liberties really redounds to the disadvantage of the American Jewish community, which is so dedicated to free expression. It was astounding and very promising to see President Trump at his speech that he gave at the prayer breakfast, supporting free exercise of religion, because that, in terms of my experience, was substantially damaged in terms of various litigation that I encountered in the past. Under past administrations, for example, the FBI was weaponized against Jewish rabbis who were trying nothing more than to accomplish a Jewish divorce. And a bogus effort was made successfully by the FBI at great expense to prosecute those who were trying to do and really did no actual harm, but just were trying to exercise a religious right. And I was very concerned about the efforts, again, on use of free speech as a means of preventing Jews from attending synagogues, to be able to harass Jews on their way to synagogue on Saturday mornings and to intimidate them, and for the courts of the United States essentially to penalize those who were trying to invoke some judicial power to prevent that. So, surprising as President Trump's suggestion was that maybe Gaza could be turned into an American property, that America would be in some way enforcing or rebuilding that area. And as much as various Israeli politicians supported the notion of having the United States as a neighbor to Israel, of course, that was an idea that could only be floated by the President of the United States. If anybody else had tried to express that, they would have been ridiculed, just as Trump is today being ridiculed. So my feeling in terms of future, a Holocaust in the future, as one who began as a child, as a refugee from the Holocaust, I don't currently see a Holocaust in the future in the United States, but I see great danger to the Jewish state, to the identity of Jews and Israel, unless the world can be turned around under the leadership of leaders who have been elected both in the United States and various European countries to support Israel and to support the Jewish people. this is an appropriate time to consider that, particularly because this week's portion of the Torah has to do with the deliverance and the exit of the Jews from Egypt and how they went out. The Torah says, biyad ramah, with a strong, upraised hand. And that's what we have to see in the United States and in Israel.
Well, thank you for that exceptionally incisive remark. I'm led to comment that you and I and Yossi Hollander, for about 2 years, warned America that we might see another Kristallnacht 2.0, especially if the election went bad. As you say, we were saved, Baruch Hashem, in this country. And really, I have confidence, full confidence, that in our country, action will be taken, and we need to align ourselves with others overseas who will do the same thing in their countries. I just want to remind you, Nat, that the original idea of Hitler's plan was to expel all the Jews and concentrate them in the state of Israel and then destroy them there, as you well know. Now, what is the chance that we may see an impulse like this, pushing people out of Canada, out of Australia, out of Brooklyn, out of Holland, out of England, and they say, okay, time to go to Israel. And then we have, not only do we have Iran promising every day to destroy Israel from Tehran, from Lebanon through Hezbollah, from the Houthis in Yemen. But now we have the next major menace walking onto the scene. And I speak to you of Turkey. Turkey, which once owned Jerusalem and once owned Palestine for some 500 years. Turkey has said it wants to reclaim Jerusalem, and it is just now making a strategic alliance with Syria, including air bases. And what is the chance that on the world stage, suddenly out of nowhere, we see 50 tanks, Egyptian tanks, on the Israeli border? Where did those come from? Well, we're going to fight the Houthis with tanks on the Israeli border. So the point is, what is the chance that these Holocaust-type activities are going to be seen throughout Europe as Jews are more and more threatened out of their comfort zone, threatened out of their neighborhoods, where they're going to go to Israel, and there it'll be the opportunity for the great nemesis?
I mean, I think, frankly, that the ingathering of Jews into Israel will only strengthen that country. It's amazing that with 10 million people in Israel, Israel was able to do what it did do with regard to both Gaza, Hamas, and this northern border also. I mean, it's amazing the victories that it was able to accomplish. And I think that with God's help, the same thing would be true in multiple ways in the future, and particularly with the recognition by the United States, which continues to be the world's leading power, that Israel is strong and has to be supported. So I think that this should not be viewed as a reason for Jews to remain in Europe or in America or in other places where they may feel temporarily comfortable. But I think that it does indicate a reason for the Jewish people to get together and become, as they already are, a leading world power. And even with Turkey, the threats that are being made by Erdogan and by others against Israel can be discounted and should be discounted, I think, by the reality of Israel's own strength and power, and America supporting it, and of course, the divine support that has led to these miraculous, really miraculous victories that Israel has had ever since the terrible attack of October 7th.
All right, next we turn to our nation's most valuable pro-Israel litigator. She went second in our lineup after Nat because her father went first. She'll always be after her father. I give you Brandeis Center President Alyza Lewin. Take it away, Alyza, gem of our group.
Thank you, Edwin. It's always a pleasure to be here and a particular honor to be able to follow my teacher, my mentor, my father, Nathan Lewin. So thank you for that. I'm listening to this and I think that the Jewish people face a threat that you haven't even really started to discuss here, because I actually think that the enemies of the Jewish people realize that they could destroy the Jewish people. They don't need the violence. They don't need the killing, right? What they've realized is that they can just erase our identity as a people and deny our history, and that'll take care of destroying a big portion of the Jewish population. What do I mean by that? Right? My father talked about the First Amendment and the free exercise and the need to protect Jews to make sure that we can practice our faith. So much of the work that I did, first grew up watching my father and then worked with him, was focused on exactly that, protecting Jews in the United States to make sure that they could practice their Judaism freely and with pride. But one of the things that I realized when I came to the Brandeis Center about 7.5 years ago is that if we only focus on protecting Jews on the basis of our religious practice, we are missing what may be today the greatest threat to the Jewish people, which is what has now been called and labeled erasive anti-Semitism. Because what has happened is we've been using the law to protect Jews and recognize that Jews are not only a religion. We're not only defined by our religious beliefs and our religious practice, we are also define our identity as part of a people with an ancestral history and heritage that is inextricably rooted and tied to the land of Israel. That's where our identity as an as a people, as Am Yisrael was solidified. You cannot separate our history and our heritage from the land of Israel. And quite frankly, our identity as a people, indigenous to the land of Israel, is what has maintained our strength and our survival throughout the centuries, right? No matter what happened to the Jews, you read off that whole long list of expulsions. But what happened to the Jews is the Jews always, after each and every one of those expulsions, determined, you know what? We have to understand that we as a people, we don't know exactly why we have been expelled, but we still recognize that we are all part of a people and we are yearning one day to return to our ancestral homeland in the land of Israel. It was that yearning to return to Zion, that understanding that we are connected to Jews around the globe, that has made sure also that the Jews have endured. In addition, right, to the religious faith and the religious practice. And what's happened today is, as we have been increasingly successful in using the law to protect harassment and discrimination that targets the Jews on the basis of our shared ancestry and ethnicity, what are our enemies doing? They're claiming, you guys don't have a shared ancestry and ethnicity. You're not a people, and you don't have any history in the land of Israel. And if you don't believe me, just look at what they say and what they write. Last semester at Boston University, they put out a zine, like this online brochure called Smash Zionism. And the first line in this booklet says, what is Zionism? And I quote, it says, we do not accept the term Jewish people in any form whatsoever. And it goes on to say, for us, there's only one Jew. Like all Jews know, there's only one God, they say, and that is a religious Jew. So in other words, what they're doing today is, and this is the challenge we face, is that most people in society cannot tell the difference between a good faith political debate about the Arab-Israeli conflict, about Israel's policies on the one hand, and the vilification and dehumanizing of Jews on the other. And so what they're doing is they're vilifying and demonizing and dehumanizing any Jew who dares to say, I define my identity as part of a people indigenous to the land of Israel, right? If you say, I may or may not also follow religious practice and religious belief, but the one thing that I definitely view is that I am descended from the Jewish people, right? I mark the Passover Seder because I believe my ancestors were liberated from slavery in Egypt. I mark Hanukkah because I believe my ancestors were those Maccabees, right? If you say that today, you are treated as a pariah. You are equated with evil and told you are not welcome. The pressure on our young people today is intense, right? Many students on the campuses today have grown up completely outside the Jewish bubble. They didn't go to Jewish day schools. They didn't go to synagogues. The one thread that has connected them to the Jewish people is this identity that they believe they were part of the Jewish people. And they come to campus wanting to continue to engage outside the Jewish bubble with all their extracurriculars. And suddenly now they're being told, what kind of Jew are you? If you're that Jew who still has that thread and believes you're part of the Jewish people, you have a choice. You either can have your friend group or you have this Jewish identity. If you want the friend group, you got to shed it. And that's the way they're slowly, right, erasing our Jewish identity. Hate, right, doesn't start with genocide. The ADL has, they call it their pyramid of hate. And they show how at the bottom, they say it all starts with the biased attitudes. And then it escalates to what they call the acts of bias, which are like the slurs and the jokes, the nasty jokes. And then there's the discrimination, the actual shunning, the exclusion. And only then does it rise to the level after that of actual violence, where you get the assaults, you get the vandalism. And then at the top of the pyramid is genocide. And what's happening today is that we have this erasive anti-Semitism that is demanding that society agree, right? It's through this totally, the distorted teachings that are being put out there under the guise of political debate that are not actually engaging in any kind of discussion about what is actually happening or legal standards or any of that. It's just false narratives designed to equate that Star of David with the Zionist with evil, whether it's apartheid, colonialism, now genocide. The message is just that Jew is evil. And as you said, how does anti-Semitism work? The way anti-Semitism works is first it dehumanizes the Jew. And then once the Jew is dehumanized, you can mistreat the Jew. You can expel the Jew or worse. And that's what we're seeing today. We're seeing the Jew being dehumanized, then pushed out, right? And who knows what will come. But for those that are pressured, right? They don't even get to the point of being pushed out because they don't want to be pushed out. They just give up their Jewish identity completely. And so I do think that what we need to recognize is this rewriting of Jewish history and the narrative that has now taken root in American society and elsewhere is a narrative that says the following. It claims that everything that ever happened in the Holy Land since creation is Palestinian. It recognizes that, yes, there were Jews and there were Christians and there were Muslims in this land, but they claim that those identities are only faith-based religious identities and that the cultural, ethnic identity of every person that ever lived there is Palestinian. That's how you get this concept that Jesus was a Palestinian. And then they say we know the difference between the Jew and the Zionist. The Jew is the one who accepts that Jews are just a faith. The Zionists they accuse of being the one who they claim is erasing Palestinian history and heritage by calling it Jewish. And then they say we have a term, anti-Palestinian racism. Anti-Palestinian racism is anything that pushes back against this narrative I just described. So if you have the audacity to say, I define my identity as part of a people indigenous to the land of Israel, you are now called a racist because you're asserting your identity as a Jew, part of a people indigenous to this land. They're claiming is somehow erasing their identity, and therefore you're being accused of being a racist if you're a Zionist. That's today's Zionism is racism. That's what's being used to destroy the Jewish people, to pressure those Jews who this is how they define their Jewish identity, to give that up, to abandon that. And that's a threat that I think is just as great right now, if not greater, than the threat and the increasing threat that we're seeing of violence.
Alyza, and thank you for joining us and for those tremendous words and for everything you've achieved at the Brandeis Center. I think that you hit a nerve, and that nerve is the nerve of narrative. Underneath all of this hate, and then the action that hate inspires or connects to, is this evil narrative. And we've seen it before. We've seen it with the poisoned wells. We've seen it with the protocols of the elders of Zion, which went from Henry Ford to Adolf Hitler, and from Adolf Hitler to the Arab League. We've seen this in so many places, and now we see it reemerging after years of the Abe Foxmans of the world trying to get it straight and to achieve a truthful and safe narrative. Now we see it coming back just the way you said. But not only do you mention the specifics, I'd like to talk about the root causes, and I talk about Wikipedia, and I talk about the fact that, and I've investigated Wikipedia. I had one of the biggest investigations, the dumbing down of knowledge, which actually has its own Wikipedia page that I wrote about them. And you see the infusion of the anti-Israel commentators, and this can always be gauged because on every Wikipedia page, there's an edit page, and you can see what the edits are. In addition, we see news media, and I can tell you that the news media has been infiltrated systematically by the Jew haters in the new generation. For example, one of the worst is NBC, National Broadcasting Company, and it's not operated out of a basement. It's a Wall Street multi-billion-dollar business. When NBC stated that not only were the Jewish hostages coming home, but Palestinian hostages were coming out of the prisons. These were murderers, mass murderers, bombers, people with 25 life sentences for killing 25 people. When I saw that, when I see the fact that we have one of the world's stupidest people on MSNBC, Joy Reid, and she said, these raids are like Gestapo raids. And she doesn't know what Gestapo is. Geheimstaatspolizei. They couldn't fit all the words onto the stamp, so they made it Gestapo. A Gestapo raid usually ended up in torture, peeling the skin off, dousing somebody in boiling hot water. So it is the remaking of our history. It is the denying of our history. It is the false labeling of our history. These fake words that don't apply to us. Apartheid, which applies to them. Colonialist, which applies to them. You tell me how the Arabs of Mecca got over to Jerusalem and up to Spain. We'll see who was, like I said, there's like 24 countries speaking Arabic, or maybe 34, and only one country speaking Hebrew. And so we have to look at who is financing this, who is promoting this. Al Jazeera, which is a Qatar operation. Sure, they can't broadcast anymore because of a FAR violation. It doesn't matter. They're on everybody's cell phone. They're on everybody's tablet and computer. And frankly, I will say again, it will be insufficient for you to lodge more lawsuits. I want you to. I want you to work until you don't have any sleep anymore and file. We need to legislate. We need action. We need enforcement. Do you have any statement about that, Alyza?
I agree with you fully.
I should do this more often. Okay, so thank you, Alyza. Finally, we want to give you, ladies and gentlemen, a new contributor, Matt Lebovic, director, I hope I pronounced that right, director of the Holocaust Education Center at our nation's premier Jewish defense organization. And by that, I mean Stand With Us. Raz, I hope you're listening. Matt is also a top contributor to the Times of Israel on Holocaust topics. He has a deep bench of Holocaust knowledge, and I know because I know a lot, and I've read his stuff, and this guy knows his material. So, Matt, take it away. and make your contribution.
Thank you, Edwin. And indeed, education really here is the answer. And that's what Stand With Us is all about. We've been around for 23 years. And I think, to be honest, until October 7th, people might have thought we were a bit passé, having these advocacy fellows on campuses and on high schools and training students for Israel advocacy. But boy, did it become clear to everyone with the explosion of Jew hatred on campuses and high schools. And people are knocking down our doors now. I will say, I think it is powerful that we're educational and bipartisan by nature. So, as we all know, a lot of the left has been co-opted by Israel haters. But one of the things that's special about Stand With Us is we are drawing students from everywhere. Zionist students, Jewish, not Jewish, from the left, from the right, and we're arming them with the facts, which is the key thing. So I'm in the in the trenches, as it were, teaching high school students and college students. And a couple of things people said I just wanted to quickly comment on that resonated. The Riviera Gaza situation is fascinating because in 2006, they had a very big opportunity to build the Riviera, had been left the greenhouses and all the aid from Europe and the world. And how soon history forgets. I was living in Israel then, and there was massive talk of how the Palestinians could develop a Riviera on their own, and that they would, in fact, do that with all the aid. Of course, we saw the synagogues and the greenhouses set ablaze, immediately after the soldiers left. The other thing that Alyza says, and this, I think, we're at students now have no historical memory, obviously. And a lot of the students I'm teaching were born even after September 11th. So, to talk about the phased plan for Israel's destruction of taking over the West Bank and how when that sort of failed, Zionism is racism at the UN, then that got receded. So we're seeing, like Alyza was indicating, where I think we're seeing that same exact thing. Let's demonize and delegitimize Israel at its core, and that'll be the way we'll get the Jewish people. So the last thing I would say is, if anyone watching this has students, please be in touch with me and with Stand With Us. We have the resources and tools to help you fight back the haters.
All right, Matt, how is it that you're able to function in any way, shape, or form on university campuses when the people line up and harass you outside the door, when they harass the Hillels, when they harass the kids at the booth? How do you fight back?
We're lucky because Stand With Us attracts the bravest of the brave, the students who are not afraid to get behind those tables and stick up for Israel. I remember seeing many tables on campuses boycotted for even marketing Birthright Israel trips, by SJP and JVP. And our students know our reputation. And to be honest, it's our job to instill in them the courage and resilience when we train them, and the facts and the network. And it's just incredibly inspiring to see them go against the entire gestalt of their campus by standing up for Israel and holding programs, giving out flyers. They have the courage and the bravery, and they're not ashamed. They're Maccabees. They're the modern day Maccabees. And we need a mass movement, Edwin. Like the second Holocaust, we need more of a mass movement in the Jewish people to train people and arm people with the facts and strategies.
And how close are we to the possibility of a second Holocaust, either here or abroad, in your opinion?
Well, I would agree with the people who said I'm concerned about Israel being surrounded by. And what about Turkey was mentioned? What about Egypt and their whole massive growing army? What threat are they facing? So I'm concerned about the long-term future of Israel and what could happen there, frankly, more.
In fact, we have to remember that the Arabs, generally speaking, as a culture, do not believe in peace treaties as much as they believe in temporary alliances. And for right now, it serves the Egyptian treasury to go with the Camp David Accords and with this peace treaty. But when I see dozens of Egyptian tanks suddenly appearing 15 feet from the border in violation of disengagement, and when I see Jordan say, well, it'll be a casus belli, that means a legitimate cause of war if you try to get the Gazans out, then I'm greatly worried. Thank you very much, Matt, and we hope to have you back. And by the way, say a word about the Emerson Fellows. What do the Emerson Fellows do?
Yeah, our Emerson Fellows, it's our flagship program on campus. And they are basically on the front lines, holding the advocacy sessions, getting in public in front of non-Jewish students, making the coalitions with non-Jewish groups, everything you could think modern advocacy needs, social media. They are the elite, premier, well-trained students that every year we have a cohort.
All right, so remember this, ladies and gentlemen. Stand With Us is not just selling tables for banquets and trying to raise money. It has actual trained people on the ground, the Emerson Fellows, and Alyza's got her own version of training young students, and we're happy in our audience today that the leader of the Emerson Fellows, Stephen Rita, are watching right this moment. Yeah, he's waving to you, Rita. Okay, let's go to our first question from the watch party in Chicago. What do you think about the program that Trump has outlined for Gaza? All right, I don't want to get too bound up into Gaza, but I can say that most people have heard of India, they've heard of Bangladesh. That didn't exist in that form until 1948, when India was broken up into two halves, if I could use the word half. One was India for the Hindus, and the other was Pakistan. And then Pakistan was further broken up. East Pakistan became Bangladesh. After every major war, there has been a major restructuring of the map for the purposes of peace. There is not one new sentence that you can utter. There is not one new footnote that you could write that will change the scenario of what we've seen for 80 years. Yossi, what do you say?
Solution for Gaza, and that is expel everybody. Because otherwise, Israelis will never be able to live when there's 100,000 Gazan within a mile away, and one day they can take their knives and guns and just run away and kill everybody in the kibbutz again. You can't keep all the Israeli army on the border all the time. There is just no other way. And unfortunately, there's consequences to what they're doing. And by the way, before the war, 41% of Gazan by Palestinian sources wanted to leave Gaza. I believe the number now is probably 95. 10% have already left. That's also unknown. The reason they're quoting now 1.8 million and not 2 is because 10% are already quietly left through the Mediterranean. There's a whole industry about that. I think if you just decide to put $1,000 ahead, all of them will be out. Most of them will be out of there within a year.
Well, I have said from the beginning, and I know many of us have said, that the reward for burning babies is not the two-state solution. The reward for perpetrating what was perpetrated and for celebrating it in the streets and participating at the civilian level, and I've said this, that I do not believe there are any innocent civilians in Gaza. I've said it from the very beginning. The reward for that should not be to uplift their society so that they could do exactly what they've been promising to do day and day again. For heaven's sakes, not only are they promising it in Gaza City, they're also promising it on Broadway, in Manhattan, in Wilshire Boulevard. So we have to take steps. And I think that one of the steps that we will have to take is to move out this population. Now, when we move it, we need to de-radicalize it. The same thing was done to Germany. Germany was moved out of certain places. The terrible Turk, the Ottoman Empire, was dismantled. And I think the same thing must be done for Gaza. And we see that over 2,000 Gazans have gone to Australia more than any other destination. And that's why Australia has now got a situation where gas to Jews can easily be stated. So I understand why you're saying that, but I think it's a two-pronged effort. One, move them out. You cannot rebuild Gaza. You cannot pour another $12 billion into Gaza to have the grass mowed again. But people must be de-radicalized. And that means that the UNRWA has got to be dismantled. The fonts of hate in these schools have got to be dismantled. And just as we did with Germany after World War II successfully, and with the Bushido culture in Japan successfully, we must rebuild that society into a decent society, and it will take at least 2 generations. All right, we have another question here from Memphis, and this is Robert. And Robert wants to know, what would have happened if Trump had not won? If Trump had not won, I don't think you want to know what would have happened. Let's give it to Nat. Nat, what would have happened if Trump had not won and the protestations of Yossie Hollander and Nat Lewin would have been overlooked and we would be facing the triumph of the Democrats? Go ahead.
Well, when I was in Israel just before and during the election, we voted absentee. I did appear on Israeli television and told those who could vote in the American elections, that this was the most obvious existential election with regard to Israel. I think if Trump had not been elected, Israel would today be on the brink of a disaster. No matter how strong its own military force is, if the United States were now being headed by the Democratic Party and the anti-Semites and opponents of Israel that have been outspoken, even the Jewish Democrats, the quote, guardian of Israel, Shomer Yisrael, Chuck Schumer, would be seeing an absolute disaster with regard to Israel and with regard to Jews in America. So the short answer to your question is we would really be close to Kristallnacht and close to a Holocaust for world Jewry if Trump had not won the 2024 election.
Yes, you're quite right. I'm very sad that you're right, but that is what we feared. And even now, the Democrats are using their residual power. For instance, Meeks in Congress just blocked the arms transfer to Israel because under certain provisions above $40 million, or a certain 4 members of Congress have got to approve. So we're going to work around that. You've made a great point. I'm going to take one more question, then make a correction. Stephen Schwartz from Chambersburg, Pennsylvania. Will the U.S. allow Israel to win the war with an unconditional surrender? Last year, no. This year, yes. Matt, what do you say?
Wow. Remember, I'm supposed to be bipartisan, but I will say that now that Israel since September has demonstrated such incredible finesse on the battlefield and such strength that I'm hoping it will be easier to to get to that point where for the first time we could actually have a decisive victory and maybe stop letting this conflict creep on for generations and generations.
By the way, I will tell Raz that you did a wonderful job walking.
Thank you.
Walking the line in this crowd of people. Yossi, will Israel now be allowed to win the war?
We have to expand the question. Okay, will Israel be allowed to attack Iran? Will the United States join Israel in attacking Iran? Will we be able to actually empty the Gaza Strip so it will be safe forever? Because once we open those borders, they're all going to leave, okay, 99%, and then you can really go after. So there's plenty of other, I think, questions that are all bigger than that. I'll give you, everything is connected, okay? Will a deal with Ukraine and Russia include, for example, getting Russia out of Syria and Iran? I don't know if you noticed, nothing was mentioned about Syria and Lebanon during the speech between the speech that of Netanyahu and Trump. Do you think they didn't speak about it? We are now in a point where there's an opportunity, which I think there's a good chance it will be taken, to reshape the Middle East for the next few decades.
I think that Russia has already reconsidered not only its political stature in Syria, but it's been eliminating a lot of its military infrastructure now that Assad is gone. Alyza, do you think that Israel will now be allowed to fight the war and to win the war?
I can't predict, I hope. What concerns me and what I really hope is that Israel's people remain united. I'm more worried that if we're not united in pursuing the war, the Jewish people are similar to other people around the world. When we have a common enemy, we unite together to fight the common enemy. If we don't and are not in the process of fighting a common enemy or recognizing the common enemy, we turn on each other. And that would be the worst thing ever. And so I just hope and I pray that no matter what happens, the Jewish people in Israel and around and throughout the diaspora can remain united and recognize what the true enemy is in terms of the external enemy, put our forces and our efforts into fighting that and not fighting and combating each other.
That's an important military observation because we can't fight a war if we're busy fighting ourselves. I'm going to go with one more question here. Sherry wants to know, why is the USA not giving Israel the really heavy bombs that can take out Iran's nuclear facilities? I'll answer that. Sherry? No comment. Okay. We're out of time, ladies and gentlemen. Hold for my closing word of wisdom, just 2 minutes away. But first, I want to thank my very knowledgeable guests who shared their wisdom and took their time from their very busy schedules. I mean Nat Lewin and Alyza Lewin in Washington, Yossi Hollander in Tel Aviv, and Matt Lebovic in New York. I also thank my talented international team, including Eva in New Jersey, Holly in Nashville, Rebecca in the Philippines, Christine in Indiana, as well as many others in numerous additional cities around the world. My team, each of them, is comprised of very dedicated people. I and we all owe them. I'll see everyone back here in 2 weeks at 3 p.m. I believe I'll be broadcasting from Mexico City. You want to be a friend of the Edwin Black Show? Go to theedwinblackshow.com/support. Keep me independent. You want to hear me in person? Watch my website for events. Consult my events page at edwinblack.com. Until then, head over to any Barnes & Noble in the U.S. or Amazon, Walmart, iTunes Books, Google Books, Kobo, or Audible.com platform, and in 190 countries across this roiling, toiling, boiling planet, where you can find any of my 225 book editions, such as IBM and the Holocaust and Banking on Baghdad. You want an autographed copy? Hit edwinblack.com and click books. Get access alerts to participate live in future shows at theedwinblackshow.com. You'll see a much enhanced and exquisitely produced version of this show that you just saw. You'll see it in about 3 weeks, plus prior episodes, by subscribing to our YouTube channel at The Edwin Black Show and click that notification button like many tens of thousands of others have. You will love them. We put new ones up each week, produced by my bold international crew. Follow me at Edwin Black Book on X as well as Facebook. And now for my closing word of wisdom. Whatever you do will make history. Whatever you fail to do also makes history. Zooming out from our nation's capital, bless all of you and pray for everything unfolding before our very eyes.